From time immemorial, the Holy Land has existed in painting, in poetry, and in man's dreams. Here stood Solomon's temple. Here the patriarchs lay buried. Here Jesus walked and preached. Yet, from the days of the Crusaders and up to 1800, few Westerners had actually visited or seen the country, and the Holy Land was cut off from the West. It was Napoleon Bonaparte, in an unsuccessful campaign to capture the city of Acre, who broke through the seclusion of centuries and reopened the Holy Land to the eyes of the West. The 19th century was dawning. The age of exploration was afoot. The rediscovery of the Holy Land was about to begin. The Holy Land of the 19th century was a desolate province of the Turkish Ottoman Empire. Plague was a constant peril. Marauding gangs roamed the countryside and lay in ambush for unsuspecting travelers. The only rule came from tribal chieftains and corrupt governors. The land was especially dangerous for Westerners, infidels in the eyes of the Muslims. To travel safely meant to travel incognito, and the first Western explorers to reach the Holy Land in the 19th century came disguised as Arabs. This figure climbing the hillside in the Judean desert presented himself as Musa el-Hakim, a Muslim doctor. But Musa el-Hakim was just a facade. He was really Ulrich Setzen, a doctor and explorer from North Germany, a man determined to see the land of the Bible with his own eyes. Setzen was accepted by the local Bedouin, and through them was guided to places that no European had seen for centuries. On one journey, he scaled the heights of Masada, the first European to reach the desert fortress in 500 years. Setzen was the first to document ancient inscriptions, meticulously copying them word by word in Greek, Arabic, and Hebrew. The journals he kept during his travels through Syria, Palestine, and Egypt were eventually published, and with them, this detailed map of the Holy Land. From the Holy Land, Setzen assumed the role of a pilgrim and traveled to Mecca. From there, he left for Yemen, where he would be finally unmasked as an infidel and poisoned on the orders of a local religious leader. Johann Burckhardt, a Swiss explorer, arrived in the Holy Land just after Setzen had left the country. He came as part of a special mission for the British government to search out new trade routes in the Middle East and Africa. He adopted the guise of an Indian merchant and called himself Sheikh Ibrahim. He took long trips into the interior of the desert, sometimes alone, sometimes guided by Bedouin. Ostensibly, he was searching for new markets, but in reality, he was seeking out the ancient sites of the Bible. From a point east of the Dead Sea, Burckhardt began to search for the way to the Red City, the ancient city of Petra that Ulrich Setzen had been unable to find. Burckhardt knew there was only one passage into Petra. Time and again in his search, he was cheated by his guides and made to pay large sums in tolls and bribes. But finally, after weeks of travel, Burckhardt entered Wadi Musa, the Valley of Moses, the entrance to the lost city of Petra. He was the first European to enter there in 600 years, but did not stay long. He feared for his life. "I know well the character of the people around me," he wrote in his journal. "I am without protection in the midst of a desert where no traveler had ever before been seen, and too close an examination of the works of the infidels, as the Bedouin call them, would only excite suspicions that I am a demon in search of treasure." Johann Burckhardt never returned home to his native Switzerland. From the Holy Land, he went on to Egypt and died in Cairo of malarial fever. "30 years after Napoleon's campaign, Palestine was plunged once more into conflict. Acre, the principal town of the country, was in dispute. Muhammad Ali, ruler of Egypt, sent his forces into Palestine under the command of his son, Ibrahim Pasha. After a siege of 7 months, the Egyptian forces breached the walls of Acre, and Ibrahim became ruler of Syria and Palestine. Ibrahim, the new Egyptian ruler, introduced important reforms. For the first time in generations, there was law and order in the towns and villages of Palestine. The country became a safer place, and visitors began to arrive from all over the world. From England came Moses Montefiore, the Jewish philanthropist. He believed that charity alone was no way to develop Jewish life in Palestine, and encouraged the Jews to set up light industry and agricultural settlements. Rabbi Joseph Schwartz arrived to write the first Hebrew geography of the land of Israel. Then, towards the end of the 1830s, an American arrived in the country. Edward Robinson grew up on the Bible. For him, the patriarchs and the prophets were as real as the pioneers of the New England where he had spent his boyhood. Robinson was one of the leading authorities on the Bible in America. In 1838, he began a tour of the Holy Land that he had studied and written about so much. It was the realization of a lifetime, and time and again, Robinson thrilled to see the scenes he had imagined as a boy come dramatically to life before his very eyes in the land of the Bible. Robinson took with him Eli Smith, an American missionary in Beirut. The aim of the trip was to locate as many biblical sites as possible. As they traveled from village to village, from encampment to encampment, Robinson and Smith began to ponder whether the Arabic names of places they visited were linked to ancient Hebrew place names of the Bible. Could Tekoa be Tekoa, the birthplace of Amos the prophet? Could Selon be Shiloh, the home of the Holy Ark? Could Beit-In be none other than Bethel, where Jacob dreamt his dream? The link between names was a first step. Then the team spent hours with the local Bedouin, checking locations and gaining new directions. In this way, Robinson successfully identified more than 1,000 sites, an achievement which established Robinson as the father of biblical archaeology. Robinson later wrote, "Our journey has led us through scenes associated with the names and historic incidents and deeds of Abraham and Jacob, of Solomon and Saul, of Jonathan and David. We have been able to trace out the places where they had lived and acted, and to tread almost in their very footsteps." The expedition arrived in Jerusalem in the spring. Robinson began surveying the surrounding walls of Temple Mount. Near the western wall, Robinson came across a number of large stones jutting out from the main wall. He realized that he was looking at an archway, the remains of one of the bridges which led from the city onto Temple Mount. It is still pointed out as Robinson's Arch. Three years later, Edward Robinson published an account of his travels. Within it, he transformed almost mythical place names of the Bible into real geographic locations, and his book, Biblical Researches, received international acclaim. Egyptian rule in Palestine was to last only 9 years. In 1840, 40 years after Napoleon's invasion, the British Navy stormed Acre and returned Palestine to Turkish control. The renewal of Turkish rule in Palestine did not halt the flood of travelers arriving from the west. In 1848, an American naval expedition landed at Haifa, and for the first time, the American flag was raised in the Holy Land. The mission was to sail and chart the River Jordan. Local Galilee residents were astonished to see boats drawn overland by camels. Lieutenant William F. Lynch of the American Navy was the expedition leader. His task was to see if the Jordan could be a commercial route. The mission accomplished the mapping and charting of the Jordan without difficulty, but any hopes for a trade route were dashed. The Jordan was too winding and too narrow. Nevertheless, Lynch proceeded with the next stage of the mission, the exploration of the Dead Sea. It proved a grueling, exhausting task which had already claimed the lives of several previous explorers. Lynch wrote in his journal, "In the awful respect which this sea presented, I seemed to read the inscription over the gates of Dante's Inferno. Ye who enter here, leave hope behind." Yet, after 22 days of intensive labor, the mapping and exploration of the Dead Sea was completed. The camp moved to the north of the country.
Maybe 2 weeks, but that's not bad.
Lynch assigned his second-in-command, Lieutenant John Dale, with the task of exploring the swamps north of the Sea of Galilee.
Yeah, and some of the fire. But it was a little chilly.
Keep your eyes.
The mission was to search for the then unknown sources of the Jordan, the same River Jordan which had been perceived for centuries in Christian thought as the mighty river of the land of the Bible. By the end of the mission, Dale, like most of his men, was struck down with malarial fever. He was never to return home. Lynch recorded in his log, "My poor friend lingered until the evening of the 24th, when he expired so gently that it was difficult to tell the moment of dissolution. As I thought of his young and helpless children, I could scarce repress the wish that I had been taken and he had been spared." The flora and fauna of the Holy Land was an area hardly dealt with by explorers of the day.
Job 14. For there is hope for a tree, if it be cut down, that it will sprout again, and that it
Henry Baker Tristram was a British clergyman and a nature enthusiast. As he read the Bible, he pondered upon its many references to nature in the Holy Land, and whether that nature had remained unchanged through time.
And put forth branches like a young plant. Gentlemen, let us proceed.
Provided with a special grant to undertake research into the zoology and botany of the Holy Land, Tristram rediscovered the nature of the Bible. It had changed hardly at all. Tristram identified countless varieties of birds, mammals, fish, and reptiles, earning him the title of the founder of Holy Land zoology. It was Tristram's love of birds which led him to a major discovery. In the area of the Dead Sea, he identified a rare starling known to this very day as the Tristram. By 1860, all the great powers were represented in Jerusalem, and each had their own post office and telegraph service. They were, in fact, competing with each other for influence in the Holy City, a struggle which would last for half a century and would eventually end with a British mandate over Palestine. In 1864, a British Army officer, Captain Charles Wilson of the Royal Engineers, arrived in the country to undertake a topographical survey of Jerusalem. The city had been ravaged again and again by cholera, and Wilson's map was to be the first stage in installing a new water system. Descending beneath the city, Wilson found himself wandering through a maze of channels, aqueducts, cisterns, and sewers. They were the ancient waterways of biblical Jerusalem, and Wilson marveled at their workmanship and design. Then, underground, in a chamber north of the western wall, Wilson came across a magnificent archway. It was the site, he deduced, of an entrance to the temple at the time of Herod. The Royal Engineers had made a major biblical discovery beneath Jerusalem, and the archway became known as Wilson's Arch. In all the excitement, the idea of installing a new water system in Jerusalem was quietly forgotten. But in Britain, it was judged the right time to establish the Palestine Exploration Fund, the PEF, for the continued exploration of the country. Four years later, Charles Wilson was back in the Holy Land, heading a private expedition to the Sinai Desert. His aim was to chart the Exodus, to retrace the route of the children of Israel to the Promised Land, and to identify the precise location of the giving of the law. But there was an ulterior motive. The year was 1868. The construction of the Suez Canal would soon be complete. Wilson knew that if the British would ever need to defend their rights at Suez, a detailed map of the passes leading to the canal would be vital. He secured the support of the British War Office for his mission. It was not only a matter of charting the Exodus, but a case of safeguarding Britain's interests in the Middle East. Lieutenant Charles Warren of the Royal Engineers was the man who continued Wilson's work in Jerusalem. Warren wrote of Jerusalem, "It is a city of contradictions. Jerusalem excels in the anomaly of her customs, which can scarce be called civilized, even though she is the center of religious attraction to the civilized world. In her, all nature is in disorder. All order would be unnatural." In Jerusalem, Warren was hoping to find traces of the city of David and to determine the precise location of the temple. The Turkish authorities were not sympathetic to the British mission. They considered it their holy duty to maintain Jerusalem first and foremost as a site sacred to Islam. They restricted Lieutenant Warren from excavating on Temple Mount or any closer than 40 feet from its walls. It was Warren's experience in military mining that gave him the means to continue. Between March and June 1867, Warren sank more than 27 vertical shafts, some reaching a depth of 125 feet underground. Once below, the team would begin to tunnel horizontally towards Temple Mount. The risk of a tunnel collapsing was always there. Warren wrote, "Generally, the men knew by a trembling of the whole fabric a few seconds before this took place and got clear, but it was a very hazardous work and gave me intense anxiety."
Careful. Are you all right?
All right.
Come on, there isn't much further to go.
Warren spent almost 3 years excavating Jerusalem. He penetrated the foundations of the southeast and southwest corners of Temple Mount, 80 and 90 feet below the surface. There, in the dust and darkness, in valleys long forgotten, in tunnels which once provided access to the temple, it seemed at last that the mysteries of ancient Jerusalem were being revealed. One day, Warren received a delegation of rabbis. He recorded, "The Jews have an old tradition that when the third spring of living water is found in Jerusalem, the Messiah will come. And they looked upon my work as assisting in bringing about the end of days." More and more Jews were arriving in the Holy Land in these years, most coming to live in Jerusalem. Under the patronage of Sir Moses Montefiore, the first neighborhoods outside the walls of the old city were built. New schools, synagogues, and clinics were established, and by 1870, the Jewish community would become a majority in Jerusalem. In 1870, the British commenced the entire mapping of the Holy Land. Under the symbol and auspices of the Palestine Exploration Fund, the Great Survey was to take 6 years to complete.
Same peak. 20 degrees southeast.
Among the leaders of the Geographical Survey were Lieutenant Claude Condor of the Royal Engineers and Lieutenant Horatio Kitchener, destined to become Lord Kitchener, British Secretary of War during World War I. From time to time, the survey team of British soldiers encountered opposition from local residents. The team set up camp near Safed. In the evening, a local sheikh, Ali Aga Alam, furious at what he considered to be the trespass of the British on his land, entered the camp and tried to attack Lieutenant Condor with a knife. The sheikh was seized, disarmed, and bound up on the ground. At this point, the villagers, incensed by the capture of their sheikh, advanced on the camp. Reluctant to open fire, Condor ordered his men to beat a hasty retreat. Several members of the team were seriously injured. The camp was destroyed and most of the equipment lost. The incident led to the suspension of the survey, and it was only after those who had carried out the attack had been jailed that the survey was continued. In 1882, the survey was published. Within its volumes were countless maps, carefully copied inscriptions, ancient harbor sites, and intricately drawn plans of the holy places. The survey was a definitive work, the crowning achievement of 80 years of exploration. It covered all the territory from Tyre to Gaza, from Banyas to Beersheba. There was not a shrine nor a ruin, not a road nor a wadi, which had not been carefully photographed or documented. the survey of Western Palestine was over, and the rediscovery of the Holy Land was complete. As this period of exploration came to a close, a new era of renewed Jewish settlement, which was to change the face of Palestine, was about to begin. The explorers of the 19th century had succeeded in bringing the Holy Land out of the realm of myth and into the world of reality, and in so doing had opened the Holy Land to the interests of empires. They were men motivated to understand the land of the Bible, to see it with their own eyes, and sometimes to pay for that with their lives. They were, in every way, the men who searched and found the Holy Land.